Spirituality is a word that gets thrown around a lot. It means very different things to a lot of different people. And because of that, it's often completely misunderstood, misinterpreted, or misused. And getting this concept right, really grasping and understanding what spirituality actually is about and how to actually pursue it is one of the most important distinctions that you can make in your life. Why? Because how you define spirituality determines what you pursue, where you're going to place your attention, how you spend your time and energy, and ultimately what kind of results you get from life. For example, someone can be spiritual for decades and never actually awaken or reach the end goal of spirituality. Someone can be following a spiritual path and never actually discover the truth of reality or consciousness. A lot of people pretend to be spiritual or claim to be spiritual, but they're not actually doing the process of spirituality. And there is a very specific process to spirituality. So what is spirituality? What is it really? And is there a best way to approach it? If so, what is that best way? What do all of the major wisdom traditions have in common? And how do we avoid falling into woo? How do we avoid following false gurus or joining cults? And if there is indeed an ultimate truth, how do we actually experience it for ourselves? These are the questions that I'm going to be tackling today. If you're new here, welcome to Awakened Evolution. I'm Jasper Brown. And at this stage, I have almost a decade of personal spiritual practice and study under my belt. So I'm going to be drawing from that experience. I've also been a member of various spiritual organizations, followed different teachers, practices, and teachings. I've been a part of a cult-like group, spiritual community. So I'm going to be drawing from all of this information in order to answer these questions today. So when we think about spirituality, we often arrive at the religious traditions and practices and schools around the world, the most popular being Christianity, Buddhism, yoga, Tantra, Taoism, Sufism, Judaism. And in the formal sense, spirituality, we can think of it as a path, one that leads a disciple or follower towards wisdom in pursuit of spirit, seeking to answer and discover the mysteries of creation, which is often said to be the divine, the sacred, the absolute truth, or enlightenment. And in this formal sense that's kind of been codified by many of the world's wisdom traditions, it's been established across long periods of time, across different cultures, and many of the different cultures have created similar seeming institutions and organizations and paths which point towards something. And in the informal sense, spirituality also includes a much wider array of practices and identities. We've got things like astrology, sound healing, Reiki, psychedelics, incense, music, clothing, jewelry, crystals, mandalas, sacred geometry, numerology, veganism, vegetarianism, prayer, meditation, chanting, ritual, shamanism, angels, demons, entities, and even aliens. So in my mind, the real question becomes, how do we figure out which of these things to focus on? There's so much that comes underneath the umbrella of what we typically think of as spiritual. Which paths and practices actually lead us to the truths or truth that we're seeking? This is especially difficult because almost every spiritual path, teacher, or teaching claims that this is the correct path. This is indeed the ultimate teaching. This is the most direct way. We've got it. But as the seeker, as the practitioner and student, this creates a problem for us. Should we pray or should we meditate? Should we do plant medicine or practice witchcraft? Maybe we should attempt to commune with aliens, and they'll be the ones to give us the truth. It's not so clear, especially when you're beginning your forays and explorations into spirituality, which path is the correct one? What teachings are the right ones? What practices do I actually need to focus on? And so we could step back at the beginning of this journey and ask ourselves, what are all of the various different spiritual teachings and paths actually pointing towards? What is the truth or supposed truth that we're claiming to discover? And I think if we want to answer this question honestly, we need to, first of all, examine what all of the major traditions are pointing to. This is a good place to start. So, Christianity is pointing to God, the Logos, often through the path of Christ or following Jesus. Judaism has Yahweh and Ein Sof, which is the absolute or the infinite. Islam is following Allah, again, the absolute reality. Hinduism has a sort of pantheon of gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and many, many other demigods, and points us towards liberation, or moksha, as it's known. Buddhism claims that the truth is emptiness, nothingness. The path is cessation of the mind in order to achieve nirvana. And Taoism speaks of the Tao, the complete dissolution of the doer. And despite all of these sort of seeming surface differences or nuances, all of these paths essentially claim that there is this higher or ultimate reality, a causal being or principle, something that is hidden or veiled, but that can be revealed or can be known through dedicated practice and devotion to the path. This comes in the form of practices like prayer, meditation, contemplation, renunciation, so giving up, detachment, and careful observation. These traditions have sort of codified these into a path that is essentially an attempt to know or discover this reality for yourself. And across cultures and across time periods, that ultimate reality is said to have specific qualities or attributes. That it is eternal, It's infinite. It's all loving, all knowing, all powerful, absolutely good, absolutely beautiful, true, or capital T, truth, and absolutely true. And this appears again and again throughout human history, which points to something, doesn't it? I mean, if all of these traditions and paths and schools that have been sort of codified across thousands of years of human history in different cultures, in different time periods, and they've essentially all arrived at a similar, somewhat similar claim that there is this mysterious something that humans across time have attempted to discover, this ultimate layer, this ultimate reality, this ultimate truth. They're all essentially pointing towards the same thing, which is that what we are, or what we take ourselves to be, is not what we actually are. And that the truth of that can actually be known when we collapse the separation of illusion, or this, there is a certain illusion that we are somehow separate from this identity, this ultimate truth. And if we can collapse that distinction, or collapse that illusion, we can discover it for ourselves. We can reach enlightenment. We can discover God. We can attain nirvana. And so, if all of these paths essentially point to a similar place, or something of a similar place, then how do we choose the right path? Is there even a right path? Because if you ask a Christian, they'll say you need to pray to Jesus. If you ask a Muslim, they'll say you need to follow Allah. If you speak to a Buddhist, they will say, listen to the Buddha. So what do we do? Well, I'll tell you what most people do, is they adopt a specific teaching or path based on conformity. Their friends are Christians, so they become a Christian. They like the sound of Buddhism, so they jump into Buddhism. Everyone in their country is a Muslim, so they pray to Allah. Which on the one hand, if you think about it, it's fine. It makes sense. And in some cases, perhaps it's good to go along with the predominant path that is given to you by your culture. But the problem with that is that we're assuming that all paths are equal. We're assuming that all paths will actually get us there and get us to where we want to go, to actually give us the truth. To which I would respond, how do you know? How do you know that your path is the right one? And you might say, well, my friend told me. My friends are doing it. I'm just going to go with that. Or my teacher is very, very wise. And because he or she is very wise, there's something there for me to learn. I'm going to follow that. Again, it's not a bad policy. We should seek wisdom. We should follow insight. Or you might just say, the path that I found, it just felt right. It just feels good. I feel connected. I feel a sense of belonging. I feel there's something profound here for me. But by the same token, I would say, why not just join Scientology? Why not become a Mormon? Why not follow Teal Swan or some sort of new age spiritual guru, how are you going to make that decision? Because we have this bouquet, we've got all of this incredible variety and complexity to choose from. And if we're really serious about the question at the beginning of our search, I want to figure out what's true. If we're really, really serious about that, that's not something just to jump in based on how we feel. That's not just an impulse that we follow. I mean, you can do it like that. Don't get me wrong. You're free to do whatever you want. But I would caution you with this approach, because this is exactly the mistake that I made when I first found spirituality. I jumped into the first serious path that I found. Very charismatic teachers, powerful practices. It was very exciting. And it launched me into a spiritual life after living most of my life as a kind of atheist, rationalist, scientific type of guy. And so to discover the spiritual life was incredibly exciting, opening up all of these new doors, new practices, a new relationship with myself, deeper relationships with other people. It was amazing. And at the same time, the school that I joined also turned out to be a cult. It was a tantric yoga community, in which the guru or the spiritual guide of the school was trafficking women from all over the world to receive a sexual initiation with him personally, before sending many of them to work for him as sex cam workers, in which he would keep all of the profit. When I discovered this, obviously, I decided to leave the school. That didn't feel like the right thing for me, didn't seem aligned or integrity, or it felt to me like a corruption of the spiritual teachings and the wisdom and the essential principles that I'd been aligning myself to. And so, and I will have future episodes going into that in much more depth. That's a story that I've been processing and wanting to reach a certain level of maturity and integration before I really pull it all apart and share that. But it's coming. The mistake that I made was assuming that the path that I'd found was the right one based on vibes. They told me in the beginning, you've found the best path. This is the ultimate teachings. You found an enlightened master. This is extremely rare. You're one of the lucky few. You're one of the chosen ones. Love bombing. And because I lacked discernment, I fell into ideology. I adopted the belief system. I became almost like a zealot, a mouthpiece for the teachings of the school, recruiting, getting other people in. And bam, before you know it, 6 years of my life was gone. And although there was, there's problems with that, there was a certain amount of integration and destabilization of my psyche and my worldview because everything collapsed. I also learned a lot of very powerful lessons. It was an initiation for me. And this, I think, it revealed one of the biggest traps in the approach of spirituality or belief systems in general, which is that millions and millions, most people, they find their path and they never break out of that ideology. In the school that I was a part of, that people have been in that for their entire lives, or 30, 40, 30 odd years or decades of their life given to that school. and they became locked into a specific paradigm. And most people get locked into a paradigm. And we need to be aware of this trap, because most spiritual paths have been corrupted by human survival, by politics, by power dynamics, by tradition. I mean, that's why religion has all of the problems that it does. Look at the church, for example, and their issues with child abuse, the repression of sexuality, the dogma. You can see this ideological capture that happens when a person joins a specific community, specific set of teachings, specific teacher, or follows a certain guru. It's like the mind gets trapped in a specific lane. And the tendency of the human mind is to adopt these kind of frames and start, put on those lenses and start looking through those lenses. And we actually we lose something. We miss this capacity, or we atrophy this capacity for accurate sense making and original thought, and just adhere to the teachings of the ideology of the school without critically analyzing it, or really finding what works and what doesn't work. We just kind of adopt it all wholesale, especially early on. And that's a major trap, because if you get locked into a specific worldview or a specific path, what are the chances? How do you know it's the right one? What if it's not the right one? What if there's problems there? What if the teachers are abusing people? What if the path doesn't actually lead you to where you want to go? And you don't know all of this stuff at the beginning. Sometimes it takes years or decades to actually discover all of the truth. It took me 6 odd years to figure out what was actually happening in the school. It was amazing at the edges. It was amazing when you first joined, but the deeper you got in, the more corrupt I could see that it had become. The more the teachings and the spiritual principles were twisted and warped by human survival, by ego, by shadow. And this was a relatively small spiritual school. Imagine what it's like in institutions as big as Christianity. The rot, the corruption in there is immense. It's had thousands of years to accumulate that corruption. It has billions of dollars and billions of followers. Of course, it's going to get watered down. The truth becomes very thin. And it becomes very hard to even reach the ultimate realization, because it's muddied by all of the human bullshit. And New Age spiritual communities can be just as bad. There's cults absolutely everywhere. One of the virtues of joining a cult for me was that when I stepped out of the cult, I saw cults and cult dynamics and the psychology of cults at work in humanity everywhere. And that's a major issue. And we need to inoculate our minds against cult-like thinking, against ideology, against becoming dogmatic mouthpieces for those ideologies. That's the antithesis of real spirituality. So what I learned the hard way after I left the yoga school and my entire worldview collapsed, and I was forced to confront all of the things that I did, all of the unconscious ways that I'd behaved, all of the pain that I'd caused myself and others, and how corrupted my view of spirituality had been. What I learned was that the only safe place, the only safe starting point for real spiritual inquiry was epistemic humility and caution. Admitting to myself that I don't actually know. I don't know. I don't know what the best path or the best methods are. And I cannot just rely on someone else to tell me the answers, because that's obviously what I did. I met teachers who seemed to be very wise. I just trusted them completely. You know better than me. I will just follow. Tell me what to do. And it's exactly that attitude that gets us in trouble. That's how you join a cult. That's how you get paradigm locked in your religion. That's how you can spend your entire life following a false guru or a path that doesn't lead you to the truth. So I understood after this experience that I must figure it out for myself so that I don't just follow blindly. Because ultimately, how do you know? How do you know who's full of shit? How do you know who's not? Do you have a method? Or are you just going off vibes? Are you just following your emotions? Or do you actually have a way to critically assess one path versus another path, or this teacher versus that teacher, or this principle versus that principle? And if you don't, then that's a problem. We're interested in getting to the truth. And so we cannot be sloppy here. We cannot just believe someone else, because you don't know. You don't know if they're actually enlightened. They might claim to be enlightened, but how do you know that? Just because someone might have some sort of paranormal experience or mystical state, or, be able to express a certain spiritual principle or truth, do you really know? How much is it going to take to convince you? And so this is why I say we need epistemic humility. We need to be humble in the lack of understanding that we have, and just start from a place of ignorance. I'm ignorant. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know the best method to find the answer. That's the best starting point. And this is what almost no spiritual path or teacher teaches you. But it is, in fact, the first principle that we need for any pursuit of knowledge or wisdom. Epistemology is the first principle, because epistemology says, how do we know what's true? Before we discover what the truth is, we need to discover how we might know it. We need to discover what methods are best for figuring out what's true. What even counts as valid knowledge? There are many different epistemologies. Which one is the best one? Maybe we need a combination of them. Maybe I need to come up with a recipe that hasn't been invented before. I don't know. Science is an epistemology. Science claims to be the method, or the best method for discovering what's true. That's the method our culture is perhaps most attached to at the moment. Is science going to lead me there? Rationalism or atheism, are they the best methods? Maybe collectivism. Maybe we just follow what the mass of humanity is doing. Is that the best method? Should we be skeptics and just question everything, doubt everything? What about direct experience? Is our direct experience the best way to discover what's true? After all, our direct experience is the only thing we can truly validate for ourselves without having to rely on someone else to confirm it for us. What are the problems of simply relying on direct experience? And here's the tricky part, truth itself is a first order phenomenon. So if you think about it, the truth is what's true. It exists, it is. And proof is second order. So it comes after the truth. Just because something is true doesn't mean we can necessarily prove it. What if the truth doesn't fit inside of a science experiment or inside of a lab? Science, for example, struggles with interior experiences. It struggles to measure intention or meaning or transcendence or awakening. Science as a method really struggles to grasp these things or to even prove these things. So, for example, science has never proven that humans' consciousness dies when the body dies. Science has never proven that consciousness is produced by the brain, or that there is an external world that exists independent of consciousness. Never been proven. Science doesn't understand how chemistry becomes life. So, by the same token, a mystical experience that we might have, or some sort of revelation of truth, might be impossible for us to measure and validate externally or scientifically, or let's say objectively, if such a thing even exists, but it could still be real. So how are you going to navigate that problem? And according to all of the major wisdom traditions, it is possible to know the truth directly, which means we actually have to seek to experience it for ourselves. We need to actually validate this for ourselves as a truth claim, because we don't know if it's true or not. They claim you can become enlightened, you can have an awakening, you can discover God, you can reach nirvana, or the end of suffering. And we want to entertain that as a serious possibility. If we're really interested in truth, the so-called wisdom traditions might have something to offer us. They might have a very important revelation or discovery for us, and we don't just want to dismiss that. That would be stupid. They're all pointing to something. They all exist for a reason. There's many human beings that claim to have discovered this thing, this absolute truth. So we have to discover it for ourselves. We need to validate it personally, because anything else could just be dogma, could be beliefs, could just be ideology, and therefore not true. And understanding this, this is really powerful, because this allows us to rule out many paths. Already our search is starting to get refined, because we're not interested in belief. We don't just want to believe what's true. We want to know what's true. We're not interested in blind faith. We don't just want to be worshipping some idol, whether it might be true or might not be true. Praying to some God that isn't actually there, what's the point of that? We're not interested even in tradition for its own sake. Just because human beings have been doing things for thousands of years doesn't mean we're going to devote ourselves to that, even though there might be wisdom there. There might be things of value for us there. There could be important teachings that could help us. And there is a certain rigor that we get from tradition. For example, Buddhism that has a long established history, thousands and thousands of years, and so many different practitioners and enlightened people that have claimed to reach this truth on this specific path. There's a kind of rigor that we get from that. There's a support that we get from tradition. To be a part of a lineage, for example, that hands that teaching down from teacher to student, that can give us something powerful. But we're not interested in just that for its own sake. Just because that exists doesn't mean we're going to simply assume that that's the best path. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. That's an open question. Remember, our aim is to know and to validate the truth for ourselves through direct experience, because that's the only thing we can truly validate for ourselves, that we don't need to rely on someone else to validate. And we're going to be very careful about the way that we do our sense making. Okay, so if we're relying on our direct experience, because that's the only thing that we can validate for ourselves, we need to be very, very careful about the way that we interpret those experiences. Because I might have an awakening and think, oh, I'm God, I'm Jesus now. I met God and he told me that I'm the second coming of Christ. And now I'm going to go and start my own cult following. We have to be very careful about how we actually interpret and make sense and meaning making around the things that we experience. And I would say this is where everybody goes wrong. This is where people go off the deep end. This is where people get lost in delusion. Because they have some sort of mystical experience, but when they come down or they do the process of integrating that experience, it gets filtered through their ideology, through their biases, through their belief system. And it can easily become corrupted. If you have a religious experience and you're a Christian, you're going to interpret it through the lens of Christianity. In the yoga school, I had spiritual experiences that I interpreted through the lens of the school, that put the guru on a pedestal and thought everything that I've experienced is because of him. Is that true? Is it not true? I just made the assumption that it was true. That's where we need to be careful. Maybe it's not. This actually means that we need to have a radically open mind. You can see the kind of questions that I'm raising here, the way that I'm approaching this. I'm very careful now about the way that I make sense of closed absolute claims. We actually need to develop relentless self-honesty, critical thinking, careful, very, very careful interpretation of our experiences. And the body-mind becomes our instrument. We need to sharpen the instrument that we're using and make sure that we're precise, like a scalpel. We're not loosey-goosey. We're not, anything goes. We're not just jumping to conclusions or following our emotional impulses or just believing shit. Our interpretation, the way we make sense of it, this is the major danger to any authentic spiritual path. We have to contend with the problem of self-deception. Our mind the structure of our mind and the way that our mind actually connects the dots and makes meaning, that's the thing we need to be most afraid of. That's the thing that we need to be most critical of. That's the thing we need to be very skeptical towards, because the mind is a projection monster. It's constantly going to be filtering things, projecting meaning, making assumptions. It's corrupted by self-bias and collective bias. So we're often going to make meaning and make assumptions around the biases that we have. The biases of your gender, the bias of your culture, the bias of your upbringing and your education, the bias of being a human, the bias of whatever serves your survival, whatever's going to help you to get more sex, whatever's going to help you to feel more intelligent, whatever's going to give you more meaning, whatever's going to help you fit in with your friends or your colleagues or the institutions and groups that you're a part of. This is all going to give you a whole array of biases that we then have to critically examine and be very careful of. And not just go jumping to conclusions. We need to be aware of ideology and how everything that we think is getting filtered through various layers of ideology that have been installed in our mind, like a program, like an app on the computer. And we need to be aware of the ego, the mechanisms of your mind that create the sense of self that you are. And the ego loves nothing more than to pretend that it's spiritual. It loves to adopt spiritual clothing and create the appearance of seeking truth without actually doing the necessary, dirty, very difficult, laborious work of seeking the truth. And this is why sense making matters. You can have a mystical or spiritual experience and interpret it completely wrong. You can get it completely wrong. I got it completely wrong. Not just a little bit wrong, but completely fucking wrong. In fact, as a general principle, we just need to assume that what we think, what we believe, and what we're experiencing, the way that we interpret what we're experiencing, it's wrong. By default, your worldview is wrong. Your understanding of who and what you are, it's wrong. And if we're honest, we don't know. You actually don't know. And by admitting what you don't know, you're actually closer to the truth than claiming a bunch of beliefs and a bunch of ideologies and a bunch of dogma that you got from this teacher or that teacher or who knows what, you know? This is what I mean by epistemic humility. Start from a position of ignorance. I'm an ignorant little ant or little primate living on a speck of dust in the middle of an infinite universe. What are the chances that I've got it all figured out? Zero. Almost zero. And what are the chances that anyone else has got it all figured out? Also pretty low. Very, very low. So this is why we need to take on the responsibility for figuring it out for ourselves. And I'm not saying we don't trust anyone or be closed to other, forms of information or wisdom. Actually, what we want to do is we want to be open and study all of the highest quality information that we can. We want to expose ourselves to all of the different paths, all of the different teachings, all of the highest quality sources of information, because this is our lead. We can actually put ourselves, and we do in fact stand on the shoulders of giants. All of the best minds in human history. This is the foundation that we're standing on. So we're going to listen to thought leaders, philosophers, sages, gurus of the past and the present. They have something important for us to understand. They're going to help us raise ourselves from absolute ignorance up to a position of, okay, I have a way to begin. We're going to avoid the mistake of getting sucked into any particular perspective, and we're going to expose ourselves to as many different perspectives as possible. And we're going to do the difficult work of seeking to figure out what's true across all of them, because every perspective contains some truth within it, but they're not all equally true. So we're going to sift through everything and look for the best ones. Look for the most powerful teachings and perspectives. And even once we find those, we're not going to get locked into any one of them, because maybe we find more. Maybe we find better ones. Maybe this is not the best one. Maybe it's just the best one that I have at the moment. And then we take full responsibility to validate truth claims for ourselves. For example, if enlightenment is possible, until I've experienced it for myself, I'm holding it as an unknown. It's an open question. And that open question demands my investigation. And I'm going to conduct my investigation with rigorous, almost scientific method. There's something we can learn from science. It has a very specific, rigorous epistemological approach where it wants to take a truth claim and then seek to find evidence to validate or invalidate that truth claim. That's a good principle. But we're going to apply that principle to the esoteric domain, to the mystical, to the interior experiences that we're going to seek to have for ourselves. So I'm going to save you some time, and I want to share with you the sort of universal practices that actually work. I've been studying and assessing, and since my cult experience, I've been sifting to figure out what's the essence of spirituality. How do I actually drill down into the most specific things that create the results that I'm looking for? And despite cultural differences and the different flavors of spirituality and traditions, there are certain specific practices that consistently show up over time and that have been validated again and again and again by, thousands of practitioners, millions of students throughout history. So meditation and concentration, sharpening your mind's capacity to focus and witness and do the process of self-inquiry, asking and bringing curiosity to your internal experiences and the sensory doors of perception. It's fundamental. Contemplation, philosophical inquiry, using the mind to ask powerful questions and seeking to answer those questions for yourself, putting your mind to work is very, very powerful. There's body-based practices like yoga, breath work, and things like renunciation, like fasting, restricting the body to change your state of consciousness, modulating the breath, or doing specific body postures to put you in a certain resonance. Again, bringing a meditative, contemplative approach towards the body and working with the body, mind, that there's no separation between the body and the mind. It's the same. Remember, our body is the tuning fork that we're using to get closer to the truth. So we're going to sharpen that through discipline and practice. Psychedelics, very, very powerful psychotechnology that we're going to use to access mystical states with the proper process of integration and very careful sense making and interpretation of what we experienced. My previous episode was all about how to use psychedelics for advanced personal growth, and I would highly recommend you going and watching that episode to get my complete protocol and how I approach using psychedelics rigorously, scientifically, to elevate and understand and deepen my awareness and consciousness. We also want to study states of consciousness, the gross, subtle, causal, non-dual states, to understand where we are in terms of our perspective taking, or our vantage point, depending on which state of consciousness we're in. That's a very powerful way to essentially mark and measure specific progress that we're making. I've done a whole episode on that as well. We want to understand developmental psychology to understand the various different stages of meaning making, to look at the different value sets that exist in different stages of development, to understand our altitude of development and what the next stages look like, so we can make meaningful, systematic process towards higher stage development. I've done a whole podcast episode on the spiral dynamics model. You should definitely check that out. And I'll have more episodes in the future talking more about that. We definitely want to include some form of shadow work to understand the structures of our ego, to look at the way that the ego will project and repress certain parts of us, and really make sure we're actually integrating all of the various aspects of the ego so we're not unconsciously ruled by them. This is part of the process of weeding out our biases and our ideologies and our beliefs, and separating those and turning them into objects so we can witness it. We're integrating the shadow, taking out of the darkness, taking out of the subconscious mind and bringing it into conscious awareness. And if we don't do the shadow work, that's how we end up going down some weird paths. That's how we end up twisting and warping spiritual teachings for our own egoic agenda. That's how we start cults. That's how we start taking advantage of people and abusing spiritual teachings in some of the ways that I've mentioned. And that's a major trap. And we want to study sense making. We want to actually understand and deepen our capacity for accurate sense making, interpreting our experiences, our sensory interior experiences of what comes through, and how we actually construct meaning based on that. This is a very thorny, slippery, murky territory, if you think about it. The ego's job is sense making your reality to optimize your survival as an organism. And so we really have to contend with this idea that we are deceiving ourselves. We are filling in the blanks. We're fudging the numbers, so to speak. The ego is just interpreting a certain amount of information and rendering, filling in all of the gaps, finding the easiest path to energy conservation, essentially. Your ego doesn't want to expend more energy than it has to, and it's not really interested in the truth. The ego actually just wants to survive. And so that's why all of the major spiritual traditions say we need to dissolve the separate self. We need to get rid of the veils of this illusion that we're under so that we can actually interpret and experience and discover the ultimate nature of reality, what we are beyond the mind or beyond the ego or beyond the lower self or the separate self. And that's actually something that you can do. It's possible. Or maybe you don't know that, but I'm telling you that it is possible. And you can keep that as an open question to see if you can validate that for yourself. And so these practices, I think, the short list that I've given you here, they don't demand belief. I'm not here telling you to do, telling you to believe this or believe that or do this or do that. These are methods and areas of study and discipline that we can cultivate over many years or decades or our entire life that invite you to do the investigation for yourself. And I want you to notice that this is very distinct from how most people approach spirituality. Most people approach spirituality in a very vague, undefined, completely lacking rigor or grounded, like systematic process. Have you noticed that? Most people like to be spiritual and appear spiritual and sound spiritual without actually doing spirituality. If we want to boil it down, spirituality is the search for truth, and everything that's not that is not spirituality. If it's not getting you closer to the truth, if it's not refining and deconstructing your worldview and eliminating all of your biases and eliminating ideology and turning your attention towards your direct experience and the careful interpretation of your direct experience, it's not real spirituality. It's just fluff. Most people who think they're doing spirituality are not really doing it. They're just fluffing themselves up. And I've fluffed myself up plenty. So I'm sharing this lesson because I learned it the hard way. If I look at the amount of bullshit that I was entertaining and believing and posturing as when I was in the yoga school, it's fucking cringe. Peak cringe. And I want to help you avoid that. Maybe you have to experience it to really learn, but I really want to try to help you avoid that and help you get set up in the right way from the beginning of the journey so that you can skip some of the mistakes that I had to make. So my question for you here at the end is to ask, how important is the truth to you? Because for most people, they say it's important, but in practice, they're actually too lazy to do the work. They just want someone to give them the answers. They want someone to give them the answers in a way that makes them feel good. They want to look and seem and feel spiritual and sound spiritual so that they can fit in with their friends and feel good about themselves without actually doing the work, without actually having to sacrifice anything. Real spirituality costs you something. If you want to find the truth, it doesn't just get handed to you on a silver platter. I mean, I can hand it to you, but that's not going to mean anything for you until you discover it for yourself. You have to do the work to have the experiences and then understand those experiences so that it's personal for you. So are you willing to do the work to wake yourself up and find the truth for yourself? That's the real question. And if you are, then make sure you stick around, because over the next years, I'm going to be sharing every aspect of this journey and really equipping you with all of the tools that you need to do this process. I want to dive into every nook and cranny of this work so I can really equip you to discover the things that I've discovered and to validate that for yourself and make sense of that in your own way, because it's completely life-changing. So thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you would, please leave a review for the podcast or the YouTube channel, or a comment, and share your experiences, share some of the insights that you took from this if it was valuable for you. I really love hearing your feedback and really, really appreciate your support, especially as I'm trying to grow this channel. Every comment, every review, or if you send out and reach out and send me a DM and let me know what you thought of this or how it's impacted you, that really puts wind in my sails, and I really, really appreciate that. I've been getting some beautiful messages from some of you, and that's really heartwarming and really pushes me and inspires me to keep doing this work. It takes a lot of time, a lot of cognitive effort to kind of put together all of this, and I have to sit down for hours contemplating and writing all of this and getting my ideas in order, and that takes a lot. So for those of you that reach out and support this channel, you have my deep, deep gratitude. It means so much to me. If you're a man that's searching for guidance, mentorship, coaching, I've coached hundreds of men around the areas of sex, relationships, emotional intelligence, psychological development, finding their life purpose, and increasingly moving in this spiritual direction. I want to offer guidance and systems to help men do this work and help you start awakening. And if that resonates with you and you feel called to connect, you can book a call with me and we can jump on and have a conversation about what your goals are, what you're aspiring towards, and maybe there's something I can do to support your journey. You'll find the links to all of that stuff and my work and different ways of working with me in the notes for the show. Lastly, I want to finish with a final insight, or we could say the ultimate insight. If spirituality is the pursuit of truth, then what is the truth? This is the most profound question that you can ask. What is the truth? This is actually what I think, or what I have discovered life to be about. We live in this maze. We live in this kind of mysterious reality. You're in it right now. We think we know what it is, but that's actually not what it is, because we have these illusions. We have the ego mind that's distorting and incorrectly interpreting reality. You've got it wrong. But you're in contact with the truth. You are the truth. The truth is happening to you right now. Because you have to admit that what's in front of you is true, right? There's something about it is true. You exist. You might not know what it is or what you are, or you might be incorrectly assuming what it is or what you are, but you can't deny that you are having an experience. You are conscious. You're in the world. You appear to be in a world as this kind of avatar. And so the truth, you're actually in contact with the absolute truth right now, but it's hidden. The answer is actually hidden in plain sight. You're hearing these words, you're feeling your breath, you're looking at a visual field of whatever you see before you, the room, the car, the outside. But that truth is veiled. It's distorted by language, concepts, your identity, the perception of time and space and self and other. We're in this kind of dualistic frame somehow. And all of this stuff, all of these layers of interpretation and sense making, the way your mind is doing it, is actually preventing you from understanding and actually interpreting the truth of what you are, which is right in front of you, such that you are it. And a lot of spiritual teachings and teachers kind of gatehold this information and don't teach you it, don't tell you what the answer is, but I'm going to give it to you. Which is that reality is an infinity. It's one object. You've heard this spiritual aphorism that reality is one, we are one, it's all one. It's all non-dual, essentially. There is no duality. Duality is just an illusion of separation. And if that's true, then you are infinite. Reality is infinite. There is one object that exists in reality, and that's an infinite object. All boundaries, all distinctions, all separation is just an illusion. And we think we're finite. You think you're this biological self that is born and that is going to die and that is separate from the world, but that's just an illusion. If you think about it, if everything is one, then any finite thing within oneness is just a dualistic subset. It's like a division or a partition within infinity, but it's only it's relatively partitioned. It's just an illusion of separation. Because if there is one infinite object, then that infinite object has no center, it has no outside, it has no real boundaries, it has no beginning and no end. It is absolutely everything. It is nothing. Because if it's everything, everything has to include nothing as well. It's a bit of a mind fuck, isn't it? An infinite object is singular. It's absolute. It's eternal. It's everything. It's absolutely everything all at once, forever. Which means that it is part of that infinity includes you as you are, exactly as you are right now in the world that you're in. And you are just a singular point of infinity. Which means that all division or all separation is ultimately just an illusion. And awakening or enlightenment is the direct recognition of this. This is what they say. This is what the gurus, the sages, the enlightened masters say. You can dissolve the separate self. You can dissolve the doer. You can transcend the ego mind and become one with the universe, one with everything. And you can discover this for yourself, not as a belief, not as a theory, not as a concept, certainly not as an ideology. But you can obtain this insight, you can obtain this realization through dedicated practice and study, and you will realize it as a direct knowing. Something that your consciousness will become completely aware of, completely validating, beyond doubt, beyond any word or question, and you will know it absolutely. And I can confirm that. When you have the realization, there will be no shred of a doubt in your mind that you have discovered the truth. It's like hitting you in the face. It's just as true as looking at your own hand in front of your face, slapping you in the face. Do you need a scientific experiment to validate that for you? Do you need a double-blind placebo-controlled study to tell you that your hand is slapping you in the face? Do you need a book or a teacher or a guru to convince you that your hand is slapping you in the face? No, you don't. Because you're experiencing it and it's real. And I'm here to tell you that you can have the direct realization of the truth in just as convincing a way, only that it is a higher magnitude or higher order. It is an absolute. The hand slap, if you slap yourself in the face right now, that's a relative, you can still be within the relative frame of I'm a human, my name is Jasper, and I'm just slapping myself in the face. And I know that I'm doing that because it hurt. That's the relative version. You can have an absolute version of getting slapped in the face by the truth, and it will hit you like a truck. Your life will not be the same. There is no going back to what it was before. It will have radical implications for the way that you conduct your life and what you choose to do and who you think you are and the meaning that you make. And that's what I'm trying to lead you towards here. I want you to experience that. Maybe you have experienced that. And if you have, you'll know exactly what I'm saying here, and this will ring like a bell. And something that I've learned is that the truth has a resonance. It hits you like a truck. When it hits your ears, there's a part of you deep inside that knows, that feels, that senses the truth. Because I think there's a part of us that is deeply wired and curious and longing to figure out and answer the mystery of who and what you truly are. It's as if the entire game that we're a part of is set up for you to actually figure out and discover what that is. And this is what I believe the ultimate accomplishment and victory within this game is to figure out what is true. But don't just take my word for it. let these words and let this episode and what I'm sharing with you here, let this open a curiosity loop within your mind. You actually have to do this experiment for yourself. That's the challenge that I'm throwing down. That's what I believe we are here to do. And in episodes and over the years to come, I'll be sharing exactly how I did the experiment and how I got the results that I got, so you can replicate this for yourself. And if that's something you're interested in, stick around. Please share this episode with someone who will find it interesting. And I'll see you in the next one.